Welcome to the Clean Library Podcast, where content meets conscience. We believe there are millions of you readers out there desperately searching for a better way to find clean content. Each episode, we will introduce you to a new author of clean books, giving you, your family, and your friends clean options.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marcus Williams. I'm here with my co-host Brock Morris on the Clean Library Podcast, and today we have special guest author Leslie Decapo. Leslie wants to write science fiction, but his muse will only give him romance. As a compromise, he writes romantic comedy set in a guardedly optimistic near-future world. To support his writing habit, Leslie works as a software team leader and project manager for a Midwest technology company. He enjoys bicycle riding, ukulele playing, and attending as many writers' conferences as possible. All right. Welcome, Leslie. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we jump into it, and we're excited to get to know you, we need to read your two truths and a lie. And I'll remind everyone with Steve that Brock is still ahead, 8-5, in guessing the lie. Sometimes when you go out on a limb and gamble on an answer, you lose, which is what's happening to me very frequently, it seems.
I was going to say frequently, not just sometimes, frequently. Yeah.
We'll get there. I'm playing the long game here. We got a lot of episodes.
There you go. I respect that, yeah.
Okay. So, number one, I have performed in public on instruments from all 5 major categories: percussion, strings, woodwind, brass, and keyboard. Number 2, I once sent someone a dead rabbit via FedEx. And number 3, I tried out for the lead role in my high school's production of Bye Bye Birdie, but my dancing was so bad I was cast as Harry McAfee instead. So we've got performing instruments from all categories, a dead rabbit in the mail, or bad dancing audition in Bye Bye Birdie in high school. So
I feel like whether it's a truth or a lie, that second one, there's a story behind that I'm going to want to hear.
I think so. Yeah. Like, how do we weave the dead rabbit into
a conversation?
So one of an interesting thing to me as an author, and one of the things I frequently ask about and love to talk about, is how stories come to you and like how you're inspired. And clearly from your bio, what you want to write and what your muse tells you to write are different things. So what is your process? Like, how does that work for you?
So, yeah, I wrote a couple of books. That the first one I wrote was a kind of a coming of age story, and it was university setting. And, you know, when you're about that age, pretty much everything has a very strong romantic subplot. Mm-hmm. And so I went ahead and went with that. The next book was a sequel to that. It ended up being just a straight up romance. And so I wrote those. I got those out of my system, I thought, and I'm like, okay, now I'm going to go ahead and write what I'm truly meant to write, which is science fiction. And I tried very, very hard to not let that romance creep in. And it took so much work that the story just went every place except where it was supposed to. I know as you're writing, you probably notice if you try and make your characters do things they don't want to do, they rebel pretty hard.
Yes. And
this story kind of turned into what I describe as a hot mess. It was a lot of really cool ideas tied together by a plot that just really didn't work. And so I have scrapped that. I've been stripping it for parts. And I had an experience. A lot of my friends that I in writers groups and at writers conferences do write romance. And so there's been a lot of conversations about that. And one of the conversations that I was part of, someone was talking about how their favorite historical romance was Pride and Prejudice. And someone else in the group said Pride and Prejudice was not a historical romance. When Jane Austen wrote that, it was contemporary. Yeah, and sure. That kind of struck me, right? And I, being in the sci-fi mode, my mind was like, well, you know, if we were to take one of our favorite contemporary romances from today, send that back in the 1960s to our grandmas, and they read it, it would pretty much read like a science fiction romance. And so then the next thing is, well, what happens if, what would a romance from the future read like? And so I was able to take kind of some of these ideas that I'd had in this other sci-fi story, kind of weave them together with, accepting this is going to be a romance, trying to hit all of the proper romance tropes and do all of the correct beats and come up with a story. And so that's, the reviews come back, say that I seem to have hit that sweet spot where it's like a contemporary rom-com, but it has that futuristic feel to it. And so I'm pretty excited about how that all came together.
That's cool. That makes me think about a certain amusement park that Brock and I fancy, where the future became the present and then became the past, and then they had to figure out what to do about it. Do we just stick with the 50s version of what we thought the future would be, or do we make it the future now? Or it's that revolving problem of the future eventually becomes the present and then the past.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah,
so when you're doing that, are you going sci-fi and making up technologies, or and you're in a tech job, or is that something you're trying to integrate into your stories, or how do you do that?
It is. Yeah. I'm trying to very much use realistic technologies. I want it to be not quite hard sci-fi. I call it firm sci-fi. So everything that's in there, I want it to be plausible. The title is A Kiss of the Bionic Mermaid. And so that sounds like really far out in left field. And yet the technology is a biomechanical exomuscle that can be used to increase the power going to the tail. And maybe I'll explain where the mermaid part came from.
Sure, yeah.
That's one thing that people often wonder about. My daughter, I have a daughter who's an adult now, but when she was younger, she was very much into mermaids, everything mermaid. And she met a friend who was also very much into mermaids and, in fact, had her own mermaid tail. And so she had made it out of fabric. You can get a monofin, which is, it's like flippers, except they're both together.
Yeah.
And seeing that this was something that was kind of interesting, I then was able to recognize that there's actually a very, very large mermaid community out there in the world today. This is a thing. And so to take that technology and that passion that they have and weave in some technology, I did this in a large part for my daughter because I thought she would really enjoy it. But I grew to really be interested and fascinated by that community as well. So that's one of the things that I did with the technology. I have parabolic flights. So you're shot to the edge of space and then come back down. You go halfway around the world in 5 hours, kind of a thing. Flying wing, everything that And one of the really fun things about doing near future science fiction is trying to decide what technology is going to kind of stay the same and what things are going to change and what's going to change rapidly. If you look at the automobile from 1800 to about 1930, there were some really drastic changes. And since then, there have been gradual incremental changes.
Right.
But you look at a car from 1930 and it looks not a lot different from a car from 2020. And so how do you take those technologies and make them plausible? So
Yeah.
And how do you do your, I'm fascinated by the science fiction component of that. How do you do your research for that? And how do you, that sometimes it makes me feel like some of the sci-fi out there, you've got to do some deep research into theoretical, concepts and things like that to write. But I'd be fascinated to hear more about how you research that.
No, it is. And that's one of the reasons that I really enjoy doing it. So for example, one of the technologies that I do, a large part of this story takes place on the island of Manutai, which is an artificial man-made island out in the Pacific that's home to climate refugees. So there's people who are working on that technology now, where you're building a floating platform. How would you do this? How would you connect them together? And so to be able to go out and do the research, and I get as much popular mechanics research as I do, romance writing for dummies, and it's a fun combination. I worked in a previous life. I worked in the color printer industry, and so the color printing and color, digital paper. One of the characters has an experimental treatment on her hair that, has cyan, magenta, yellow, and black capsules in there. And with an electrostatic comb, she's able to change the color on her hair. And so, it's interesting, it's plausible, and, who knows? There a lot of, like you mentioned earlier, a lot of real life tech comes from science fiction. Somebody dreams something up and someone else says,
Yeah.
hey, that would be cool. Let's go ahead and actually try and make this.
Let's make that happen. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, without storytellers making things up, I don't think we'd have half the technologies we have today.
Mm-hmm.
Fiction is probably the biggest impetus for future tech and research, really, if you think about it.
It is.
And that's cool. And the biggest leaps, like you said, from the horse to the automobile, those can only happen when people are willing to think of something that is so far afield of what you're used to or what you see in everyday life that they can create that. And I think it takes us, there are only a few people on the planet who have that ability to really take that leap and turn it into reality.
Yeah. It's fun. I love it.
That's super cool. So when you're at these writers' conferences with other romance authors, how does that's very different from your normal romance book. How do you get along with the other romance writers in these groups?
Well, so I've managed to get myself a lot of the times when I go to writers' conference, I do the AV tech at conferences. And so they accept me as the tech because I can come make their computer work, their presentation work. But no, the romance authors are very open to new ideas. A lot of them are contemporary authors, but there's also the historical. And I think as long as it's a good story and you're hitting the romance beats and you're giving them a good happily ever after, that's what really matters. And so it's been a lot of fun talking to people and sharing my book with them. I will admit that many of the people who I've talked into reading it have come back surprised that it actually does read like a romance. And so there is a little bit of convincing that needs to go on, I think. But
so with not intending to start out as a romance author, what was it like having to learn all of the tropes and verbiage and the vocabulary around that genre?
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I did decide to go with this direction, I've always, enjoyed a good rom-com movie, and I go watch those with my wife or then eventually with my daughter as well. And a lot of my writer friends and a lot of the people in the critique groups I've been in have been romance authors. And, I like them, and to support them, I would read their books, and I enjoyed their books. And so a lot of the things that I wouldn't recommend jumping into a market you're not familiar with and jumping into a genre you don't know anything about just to try and chase a trend. This was something that I enjoyed. And so it did come fairly easily to me. I had to do a little more research to understand everything that was supposed to go on. I could have an intuition guide me part of the way. But there were a lot of things that I did need to research. And I think that's true with any writing that you do. Especially if you're a reader, you're a lifelong reader, you really kind of know what a story is supposed to sound like. And that can get you a long way. And so I think there's just some places where, as an engineer, I need to try and build the pieces I don't have intuitively.
Yeah.
So,
And it's a very, I mean, it just is. It's a very female dominated genre, both in authors and readers. That's just the truth of the matter. Um, but I think there's a place, and because I've done a lot of reading as well, and it's kind of the same situation where someone has asked me to read their book and stuff, and same thing. Like, this is not what I probably would have chosen, but I enjoyed it. I thought it
mhm.
was a great story, and yeah, it was, whether heartwarming, whatever. Um, there's probably more men out there that enjoy it that aren't willing to say they enjoy it, just because they don't think there's anyone else out there that like them. Um,
Yeah.
I don't
I
know.
mean, we all like a good happily ever after,
Yeah,
and it's the stories are fun. They're not um, always super intense. So sometimes having a nice escape is, just something that's fun to read that gives you a happy feeling when you're done with it. There's a lot to be said for books like that, and I think that's one reason why um, I've heard that dystopian was really strong right up until the pandemic, and as soon as everybody went into lockdown, nobody wanted dystopian anymore. Everybody was reading rom-coms, and
yeah,
that's there's something to have uh, a story that gives you a certain way, it makes you feel a certain way. I think that's what people are looking for when they're looking for their books.
Yeah.
yeah. That's a great point. I talked to the CEO of a publishing company once about just about that, and trying to catch the trends or figure out the trends. And he said one of the most important things for him to do is to pay attention to politics and pay attention to elections and pay attention to things like the pandemic, because dropping certain genres of books at the right time makes them successful. But if that same book 6 months later will crash and burn, it,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And he said that's one of his biggest challenges is he has to be so on top of world events just so that he knows when to drop a cookbook. Because it depends. He said it literally depends on the party of the president in office whether or not cookbooks are going to sell well for that 4 years.
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was super interesting.
I can see that, but yeah.
So as authors, don't beat yourself up too much because it's not completely in your control, right?
Right.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, and people, that's they want they want to read to get the feeling or to go to the place they need to go, whether it's an escape, whether it's a feeling, and it's important that there are options and choices for them to do that, no matter where they are in their life or what's going on. Type of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm like I'm a sucker for Christmas, and during Christmas, I'll watch movies all month long that I won't watch the rest of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So my wife loves it because I'll finally sit down and watch all these movies with her that come January 1st. I'm like, nope, not till next December. But it's just because that time of year, that's what I want. And
Right.
that's what I look for. So as in romance, there's so many levels of what is, from super clean to like nothing, flirting to spicy. So how did you decide where to land your books?
I think a lot of it had to do with who I expected my target audience to be. I mentioned that my daughter was one of the first people I pictured as a member of my audience, and she's probably stricter with her choices than um, anybody else I know. So it was definitely knew if I was going to get her to read it, it was kisses only as far
Yeah.
as that was go. But that's also what a lot of my friends write, and so that's kind of what I really enjoy reading, and so that just kind of seemed like the natural place for me to land. I think if I was to try and write anything spicier than that, I think I would probably just be a little. I'd probably die of embarrassment before I actually got everything out on the page. So we'll
Yeah.
we'll stick with what I know works pretty hard.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And no matter if people try to say They could come up with any criticism or whatever they want to. They could call it a cop out. They could call it censoring, whatever. But at the end of the day, you're exactly right. You want a book that your daughter will like, and you want a book that you're comfortable writing, and the people that you are your friends are comfortable reading and writing, and that's okay.
It
Right?
is. I mean, there's,
Right?
you know, I think that's one thing that the romance genre, just because there is such a broad range of level of spice,
Mm-hmm.
as I said, that the genre does a really good job at projecting, promising, and sharing what is the expectation in this book. And I think that's something that you don't really find quite so much in other genres, but you will very often have people describe what their level of spice is. Is it kisses only? Is it a closed door romance where, we know things happen, but we don't see it on the page? Or is it, super spicy and everything
Mm-hmm.
is all right there? And I know that there are a lot of people who are looking for, that kisses only or closed door. And so being able to make that promise that that's what's in the book, you've got that built-in target audience, that built-in readership, that's what they're looking for.
So you're saying like the authors will put that in their blurb or description voluntarily because it's
Yeah.
just kind of an expectation of the genre?
Yeah. Either in the expectation or either in the blurb, the description of the book, or it's pretty prevalent in the marketing copy. And so it's very, very well established what's there. There are a lot of, this podcast is one example of people looking for and highlighting books that fit within their interest level. And there's a lot of groups or databases or Goodreads lists, things like that cater to the different levels of spice and
Yeah.
that you find in a romance novel.
So have you found that it's a challenge marketing yourself or being seen as a clean author?
No, just because I know that's the audience that I'm writing for, and I was aware of that audience before I started into this genre, and because it is so well established within the romance genre that's something that's a question that's always being asked. Whereas I know in a lot of other genres, that's not the first thing that comes to mind.
Right.
When you read a space opera, what's the spice level? Unless you're talking about Dune, right? But well, what's the level of language? Those aren't really the things that people talk about, and so I think that's probably a good way to, romance is setting an example here. I think that would benefit other genres to look at. So,
which is interesting because most people think of romance as having some of the not worst, I don't want to use that word, but the least clean content out there, yet they're the ones setting the example of allowing or giving people the information they need for the choice. So like you've got the extreme there leading the way.
Yeah. And I think it is because, it is that level of spice is something that's a big conversation topic. And there are people who they really want their spicy romance. And if all you're doing is kissing, they're not really interested in reading it. Mm-hmm. And so because it's something that it's very easy to say that's what's in the book and to know who the target audience is for that. I think that's one way it's really made it easy for that genre to be able to advertise and market to the direct, target their audience.
Yeah. It would be interesting, if a writer of political thrillers came out and in the beginning of the blurb said this is a clean political thriller, or use some of that same, like people would look at him funny. Like, what are you talking about? This,
The
Yeah, it
gunshots
was
off page, and
right. Closed door murders.
yeah, like that, right? Yeah, and I mean, we can kind of look at the cozy mystery is another example of that, where people die. That's kind of the definition of the book, and yet the murder always happens off page, right? And
Right.
so when you're getting a cozy mystery, that you're not going to have to deal with that violence that you would in maybe some other type of mystery. And so I think there's efforts underway. I think there's things are headed in that direction. It's just going to take a little bit of time. So.
Yeah. So with your book, did you end up self-publishing or did you go with a traditional publisher?
I did. My very first book was published traditionally,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a great way to go. The second book, my publisher had gone from publishing primarily fiction to primarily nonfiction, so I went ahead and self-published that. And this book, it's pretty niche. There's not a lot of futuristic rom-com written by middle-aged men, and so I'm pretty sure that it would not have. People could have gotten it. They would have said, "I like this, but I don't really know what to do with it."
Right.
And I'm knowing that, I figured it was just probably made the most sense for me to go ahead and do the publishing myself. And self-publishing, romance is one of the genres where self-publishing has been very successful. And there are some where it's a lot harder, but in romance, self-published romance is a very successful genre. And so that was another reason why I felt it was appropriate to go that way.
Yeah, and I can vouch for that on the other side, that every self-published group I try to go into because I'm not a romance author, and so everywhere I go, all of the it just feels like they're either fantasy or romance, and I struggle to say, well, there are other genres of self-published out there, but yeah, like that, those are the two primary ones that I see. So that makes me feel good that I'm not alone in seeing that trend.
And I did, one of the books I wrote interim was a middle grade science fiction. And that one, very good reader reviews. A lot of people really liked it. And I was trying to go the traditional route with that, and decided not to self-publish it because I had a number of middle grade self-published authors tell me that middle grade is really, really, really hard to do self-publishing. Still traditional is where the bulk of those books are coming from. So.
Yeah, well, in your middle grade, kids are not the ones; they're not the purchasers.
Exactly.
So it's hard to market to the parents or grandparents, whoever is buying their books for them, for sure.
Yep.
Which another lesson I've also experienced. So, what was the biggest challenge for you switching from traditional to indie?
I think it was just the amount of time involved. Even with a traditional publisher, there's still marketing and other things that are expected. And I was with a very small press for my traditional book, so it was there was a lot that was on me. But having even with that small press, there was quite a bit of marketing that did go into it. And my book was in bookstores, and it had quite a few purchases on release day, and they were able to get it into regional libraries. And that's all stuff that I have not been able to quite crack yet in the last month. Definitely hope to be able to get to that point. I know there are self-published authors who are, so but it does take time. And
yeah, absolutely. And well, hopefully not where it becomes historical fiction instead of futuristic fiction.
That's right. The 2060s, 2070s, somewhere in there. So yeah, hopefully I figured it out before then.
Yeah, you'll be good. I think you're fine. So have you done audiobooks, or have you explored that?
I have not, and I definitely want to do audiobooks. That's one of the things that either with proceeds from this book, if it does well enough, I want to go ahead and hire a narrator or something else. I've thought about doing narration myself,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know that I could narrate my own books. I think if I ever did become an audiobook narrator, I'd want to do a middle grade because I have a lot of fun doing voices, and there's not a lot of call for this in a romantic comedy, so it's just
Yeah.
it's a little harder.
Yeah. Is your book, is the point of view from the female's perspective or from the male's perspective in your
So
book?
it is, I guess it's one of those things that's not as trendy anymore, but I did it third person. And so it's
Okay.
from the alternating point of view, both the male and the female character's point of view.
So would you be looking for, does it matter on the narration then for you?
If I were to have my way, then there would be two narrators. Yeah. A male and a
Yeah.
female narrator. I
Okay.
like that best when there's the both point of views. I
Yeah.
think that makes the most sense. That's what I listen to. And I actually, there's a lot of talk about AI narration, and
Yeah.
I do have a subscription to one of the services that will do that narration, and I do that primarily for my own benefit. I'll plug the story in, get it narrated, and then I can do kind of my review. Instead, I don't have to sit at a desk and read. I can listen to it while I'm doing things, and it's been really helpful from that perspective. But I've learned two things. One, I don't want AI narrating my book because it's not there. It's not there. And the other thing is, I did take the time to alternate the point of view, the male voice and the female voice, and that really does work a lot better for those. You get a much better sense for the characters.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think in my experience, I think you're right with the AI as well. I tried it out because, Apple offered free for certain genres. So you had to agree to, I don't remember what it was, 6 months or whatever, that you would keep it. And so I said, sure, let's try it out. I tried it with a short story and stuff. And it's just not there. Like the words are there. There's an attempt at the inflection and emotion, but it's just not. It's kind of like CGI in movies, even though it's been around for a long time. It's still, when you look into their eyes, you can tell, right? It's just not real.
Yeah. And there are some movies that have been, they've come out and I've been really excited to see them. And even in the last year or two, the CGI is just so obvious that it's difficult to watch. And,
it creates a barrier between having a connection with the characters too. I mean, I find as an avid audiobook listener, I oftentimes create a relationship with the narrator as much as I do the character. And if they switch narrators, I'm like, I can't listen to this anymore because that narrator was that character. And you have that. And I just don't imagine being able to do that with AI. Just as you just said, Leslie, with CGI in movies, you lose immediately this connection with the actor when it's completely false, right? It's going to be a long time before I think it's where it can fool you enough to create that same connection with the narrator,
right?
Yeah.
If it ever even gets there. I mean,
right.
You'll look at how many things we have that can be made by a machine, and yet we still buy things that are handmade. We go up on, Etsy's thriving because we kind of crave that personal touch. And I think that's going to be something that continues on. I don't think we're ever going to go to the point where everything is AI. Just because we're social animal, we need to have that social connection. And it matters to us who made our stuff, who wrote our book.
It's almost been a renaissance of those handicrafts and skill sets, clock making, cobblers and tailors, and those have become real. When I was growing up, nobody wanted to be a tailor when they grew up. That wasn't even an option, but now it's a very sought after field because of that. People want instead of just buying it from a mass produced factory. That's interesting, connecting those two, because it was funny. Brock and I had a conversation last week about narrators, and I mentioned a name, and we both could be like, yes, I love him in this series and this series, and any book narrated by that person I will listen to, no matter who the author is. I'll listen for the narrator instead of instead of the author. So it makes a difference. It really
It
does.
It really, really does.
Yeah. And even, go ahead.
I was going to say, and to that end, I also then wouldn't discount yourself as the narrator either, because I do find that there's something fascinating when I see that a book has been narrated by the author, somebody who I already have a desire to create a connection with. And again, not every author is made to narrate their own books, but as a reader, it does, or listener, if you will, it does give me some impetus to try to say, oh, I would love to hear how the author acts out sort of their own work there. So not that you have to, but I would say don't discount yourself too quickly on that, Leslie. Yeah.
I would love to be able to get to the point of doing that. One of the other challenges is I have too many hobbies as it is. And I'm trying to get more books out, and I have to. That's one of the ones I've had to leave behind, at least for now. Maybe in a few years when I've retired from the day job and I have a little more time.
Very valid point. Yeah, very valid point.
But think about it. Like, how many people read Harry Potter and had no idea how to say the word Hermione until the audiobooks came out?
Yeah,
everyone pronounced it wrong.
Yep. I am a huge fan of audiobooks, and I definitely want to have my books in audio form because I have, I'm the dad. I'm doing the dishes. I'm mowing the lawn. I'm driving around. Right. I have about 5-10 good minutes worth of reading out of my Kindle before I go to sleep, and everything else has got to be audiobook. And so it's hard that way.
And there are times, like, I remember checking big, huge folders with cassette tapes out of the library to listen to these audiobooks. But there are voices and scenes from books where I can remember exactly where I was when I listened to that chapter. Like, I remember I was on surveillance in this ditch while I was listening to that. And it's not just the book, but that voice, like that voice takes me back. And so there's a huge connection when there's an audio that you don't get from visual, at least for me.
Family road trips are another, right? Like then you have everyone listening and everyone's into the story. It's one of the great ways we love to take trips and listen to them because it creates a shared experience too. And I have very distinct, just like you, Mark, very distinct memories of where I was at the time with my family when we were listening to this or that, or myself.
Yeah. No, nothing makes a road trip go by faster than a good audiobook. We had Yeah. We were listening to The False Prince, Jennifer Nielsen, a middle grade story. And we got home about 15 minutes before the end of the book.
Oh, that's the worst.
And we like came in and sat in the living room and put the CD in the CD player and, left all the luggage and stuff in the car and just sat and listened to the rest of the book before we did anything else. It was because it's so powerful, and it's like, we all have to finish this and we have to finish it together.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm surprised you even left the car.
I was going to say, that's what my wife and I, when we were listening to the Harry Potters, when we were first married, we would sit in the car in the parking lot of our apartment for an extra 45 minutes. Just, we got to finish this chapter. Oh, well, let's listen to that chapter. And then finally, all right, we got to go inside. Yeah.
We were living in Texas at the time, so we had to get in the house. That was where the air conditioning was.
Oh, yeah, there you go. The car would overheat. Leave it running. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are about out of time, so we want to thank you so much for being with us. It's been a great conversation, a lot of fun. We need to go back to the 2 Truths and a Lie, so I need to pull those up and see if we can figure those out. All right, so to remind everyone, well, number 1, I have performed in public on instruments from all 5 major categories: percussion, strings, woodwind, brass, and keyboard. Number 2, I once sent someone a dead rabbit via FedEx. And number 3, I tried out for the lead role in my high school's production of Bye Bye Birdie, but my dancing was so bad I was cast as Harry McAfee instead. We did not talk about high school theater, so
we didn't.
I don't think we touched any of those topics. No.
So go ahead, Brock.
All right, the rabbit thing, I just think is so crazy. It has to be a truth. Otherwise, people would by default think that that was a lie. And I'm fascinated to hear. So I'm going to go. I'm going to go with the performed public instruments. I think you've probably performed or possibly performed several of those, but maybe not all five. So I'm gonna call that the lie. But
Okay.
Marcus, we'll see where you're going.
I'm going to have, I usually go with something different, but I'm going to have to agree. I'm going to go with number one as well this time.
Okay. So, yeah, I did cello in elementary school and saxophone and xylophone in high school and tuba in college and piano as a kid. So I've done all those.
Done them all. Man, we both struck out.
Yeah. And
so which one is the lie?
Well, I am a terrible dancer and definitely don't have any skills with that. However, my high school did not have a theater department at all. That's why I was in the band playing all those instruments. So,
so the entire thing is a lie.
So
a big lie.
The whole thing.
Good.
None
you
of that
fooled us well on that one.
Yeah. All right. So dead rabbit.
The rabbit story. So,
yes.
So my wife has a lot of allergies, and one of the things that she was doing to try and help with those allergies was a rotation diet. And in that diet, you eat members of different food groups, and then don't eat it for a number of days. So you eat beef one day, and then, for 2 weeks, you don't eat beef. You can eat maybe chicken, and then don't eat that for 2 weeks. And, once you go through chicken and beef and turkey and pork and maybe lamb, and then you kind of run out of different foods to eat. And so we were doing all kinds of things, yak and kangaroo and just all kinds of things. And rabbit was one of those. And there was a store near our house that that you could buy a rabbit on, kind of shrink wrapped on the little cart. And she went to a clinic on the other side of the country and was doing allergy testing and was unable to find a rabbit anywhere. And so I bought one of these rabbits from the butcher shop and had to pack it in dry ice and ship it via FedEx. And that's definitely one of the favorite stories to tell, because it doesn't, everybody always knows that it's not a lie, because like you said, if it was a lie,
it's like way out there.
you can't make those up, right? You have to have something there.
It's either that or like the beginning to a horror story.
Exactly. Right. And in this case, major husband points there for looking out for your wife that way, especially in what is such a frustrating experience for them. I've always seen people go through that and just been like, oh, I am so grateful that is not something that I've had to do, because it's brutal. So yeah, good on you for that.
Well, yeah, it can be a challenge. I appreciate that. So,
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Leslie, for being on the show. We really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun, great conversation. And for everyone out there listening or watching, we really appreciate it. Please subscribe, follow, share, all the things. It really helps us out if you just tell a friend or share on your social media to get the word out, so that we can help others who are looking for clean content to find authors and get to know the authors, get to know all of the options, the choices that are out there to help you pick the books you want to read. So thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time on the Clean Library Podcast.